At Green Cheek, we have 3 different breweries. Each one of those comes with their own quirks. But that said, we do brew specific beer styles at each one. Our Orange Brewery, we're brewing West Coast IPA, West Coast Double IPA. That is an RO filter at Orange, and that's part of what makes that beer that beer. Here in Costa Mesa, all lager beers that are hoppy are made here, so cold IPA and West Coast Pils. Our Oceanside Brewery is all classic lager beer, and that's a whole other discussion. It's been really fun. But for these brew houses and these things, it takes time. You make a beer, you taste a beer, you tweak the beer, you make the beer, you tweak the beer, you continue to just adjust every single one of these little knobs, or as like someone like Vinny would say, grab another tool in your toolbox in order to figure out what to do next. And so for each one of these beers though, one of the things that we do for all of them is we're dry hopping the same, we're transferring these beers the same, we're carbonating these beers the same, and we're fanatics about continuing to keep dissolved oxygen out of the beer. When it comes to dry hopping the beer, we are always waiting right towards the tail end of fermentation. We harvest yeast, we get rid of whatever yeast is still thick at the bottom, sitting in the bottom of the tank, and we get that out of there. And then we're dry hopping these beers through the top of the tank. No rousing, no recirc pump or anything like that. We've tried to do the recirc pump thing, honestly, but our DO meter just clogged. So we couldn't even find out if we were getting a DO pickup from the recirc, and that drove me crazy, and so we never did it. Here we are where our typical technique, we're dry hopping at the end of the day. We come in the next morning and there's this little hop float that is sitting on the top of the tank. We put some positive pressure on the tank at 15 PSI. We let that sit for 1 hour. It's this pretty cool thing that happens where all the hops, they had a moment to finally get wet from sitting in there overnight. They then have the ability to get pushed into the beer. And then once that happens, we depressurize the tank, we open up the blow-off bucket, and we end up with a dry hop time on, for the ale beers, it's 72 hours. And then for West Coast Pils, we're at 5 days. What is that, 120 hours? 120 hours. And so one of the things with West Coast Pils to think about whenever you're dry hopping these beers, and why that length of time is a little bit longer, is because of acetaldehyde. And so you're gonna wanna be aware of that as you're making something like West Coast Pils, and that's just one of the things to throw out there. We're then crashing those beers at the 72-hour mark or at the 120-hour mark. They sit for 7 days, and then we are transferring the beer over to a bright tank. All these beers are relatively clear to brilliantly clear, and we're using Biofine in order to get those beers clear. We have this technique that is a little silly, but I like it a lot. We get a keg, we put Biofine clear into it, we purge the hell out of it, we fill it with beer, we put it on a scale. As the beer is getting transferred into the bright, we then can see and meter in small amounts of Biofine as this beer transfer is happening. Over time, we figure out this is gonna take 2 hours, we're gonna meter in this many pounds a minute, and Bob's your uncle. It gets over to the bright tank, nice slow carb on this beer. The right size carb stone is really important for this. This is something that we messed up on years ago, and it wasn't until we were sitting at a CBC with Zomenagel and asking them, oh, how big does our carb stone need to be? Come to find out, we had like the carb stone for like a 5-barrel tank instead of a 30-barrel tank, so that was embarrassing. But we ended up in this spot where we have the right size carb stone, and there's no bleed and feed action needed. We are slowly carbonating that beer. There's no bleed off happening on the side of the arm, and it's getting absorbed over the course of anywhere like 12 hours or so. And then we like a nice high carbonation on most of these beers, and so a range of 275 to 285 is something that I'm really excited about, because I want these beers to be crispy. For more on brewing, slightly above average sometimes when I'm in a good mood, West Coast IPA Pilsners and double IPAs, click the link below.